We're going to kick off. Heard from Sean Sampson a moment ago, and he's on his way. And I don't know about Chris D. Michelle. I was expecting him, so we'll see. But I just want to welcome this group. This is our first meeting, and my name is Casey Walsh. I'm on the Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'm also the executive chairman of Sims Fishing Products, and have been an angler on the Madison for well over 40 years. And I think appreciate the involvement of this group and the commitment. This is a 3-year commitment that starts tonight. And also want to thank members of the public who've joined us this evening and who are interested in this topic. The commitment really on this is to getting the right answer, but not perfect. And as Dave Cumline shared with me earlier this afternoon, perfection is the enemy of progress, in the words of Winston Churchill. And so we're going to have to set some rules on how we make decisions this evening going forward, and then and set some additional meeting dates. One thing for sure, Montana is continuing to grow, and rivers like the Madison are going to continue to see more pressure. Climate is likely to get warmer, not colder. And this working group is charged with a number of specific topics related to crowding on the river and how we address that on the Madison, and hopefully create a model that will work for other major rivers around the state. One thing that's important to fellow commissioners is that we also take a look at recreational use by non-commercial anglers and the public, and balance how that is contained in the future at the same time that we address commercial fishing. I'd like to start this evening with just a quick round of introductions, and then we'll spend some time defining the charge of this work group in accordance with the ARM. I think it'd be very helpful for this group to talk a bit about the problem that we're trying to solve on the Madison. In addition, during the first hour tonight, we're going to be looking at information from the FWP, and Dr. Eileen Rice and Don Starr here this evening to join us. I'm going to ask them to help present those materials. Around 8:15 or so tonight, I'd like to turn our focus to fishing access sites. And I should say at the outset that this is not a rule-making group. We don't have decision-making capacity with respect to FWP, but our primary charge is going to be making recommendations to the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Commission. And then in addition to that, the comment you might ask, well, why fishing access sites? In my case, collecting a lot of information related to the Madison River, I was struck by how many people had feedback on the fishing access sites and how we can alleviate social pressure on the river by making some modifications to very specific sites. So I've asked a few guests tonight to join us. One is Dave Cumline, a longtime outfitter on the Madison and a veteran of efforts to address crowding on the Madison. Dave, I believe for almost 40 years, is that correct? That's correct. And Jamie Bohr, who is the owner of one of the leading shuttle companies down on the Madison. And Jamie, are you here? Not yet. So she may also be struggling and figuring out the door situation, but hopefully she'll join us for the second hour. So I guess let's quickly introduce ourselves. I told you my story. Why don't we start with you, Brian?
Sure. Brian McKeon, I'm a fishing outfitter. We are based in Bozeman. We have a small fly shop in Bozeman, and we also have a small 10-person fishing lodge on the Madison River.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for being here. Dan?
I'm Dan Larson, one of the owners of the Madison Valley Ranch, a lodge on the Upper Madison. And I've been a managing partner for 18 years, so I've seen a lot of the evolution of Madison River during that time. 25-year resident of Montana, fishing the river. I'll make the disclosure, I'm a lawyer by training, but gone into the business world. But a lot of my background has been on transactions of sort of bringing people together to make something happen. So I'm looking forward to trying to participate here.
Allison?
I'm Allison Chular. I live in Ennis, Montana. I have been chosen to represent non-commercial use. However, I'll disclose I'm married to a fishing outfitter, Mike Chular, that also works on the Madison River. And I've been following this from the beginning as well, trying to understand moving forward what the best decision is, because as a family, we are non-commercial users and guests that aren't paying. So I want to make sure we have this for the future, make sure we are preserving the big picture. I, by trade, am a nurse and the director of nursing in Montana.
Glad to have you. Matt?
Mac Menard, I'm the executive director of the Montana Outfitters and Guides Association, something I've done for about 16 years. As it applies to this job, I'm probably 25 years former fishing game. At one point, I was managing all of Bristol Bay's, Southwest Alaska's recreational fisheries. I continue to do consulting work for the Cook Inlet folks. These are highly complex fishery management issues, allocated issues. Followed the Madison, seems like forever. And I sit on it as the natural resource seat in this process. So looking forward to putting something together that has some applicability to other rivers and focuses on the issues we've got.
Great. Mike?
My name is Mike Bias. I'm executive director of Fishing Outfitters Association of Montana. I'm also an outfitter on the Madison and outfitter in Montana. I was on NRC, which was predecessor to this group, I think. I trust that this group is more productive than the last one.
Hope so.
Yeah, I'm Rich Cockle. I'm one of the 3 non-commercial anglers. I started fishing on the Madison in 1976. I've been fishing on, and that was primarily on vacations until I moved here in 2012, and now I live about 2.5 miles from the Barney Access site. To pay for the fishing trips, I was an engineer at Honeywell Aerospace until I retired.
Welcome. Jim Hart?
Good evening, everybody. I hope you'll accept my apologies for missing tonight's meeting. I so look forward to meeting every one of you in person. I say hi to Dave Cumline because he and I used to officiate together. So I'll look forward to that reunion one day soon. I am appointed as an at-large person, and I am currently a Madison County Commissioner. I grew up in Eastern Montana, have lived in Ennis since 1977. Came here as a school teacher. Bob Cleverly and I were good friends, so some of you who are anglers might remember that name. So that's my connection to the Madison. I live like 200 yards from the river. So I know many of the guides and some of the fishermen. That's my connection. Looking forward to meeting all of you guys in person at our next meeting.
Zach?
Yeah, Zach Brown. I'm like Richard, a non-commercial river user representative. I've lived in Bozeman my whole life, except for 4 years in college in Missoula and 1 year on the East Coast after college. My dad used to play City League basketball with Dave, and I didn't know he used to be an official, but when I went to Dave's games, he would yell at the officials. So that's my story. I am currently a recreational river user and a current Gallatin County Commissioner. Look forward to being with you all. And I also send my apologies. I had a breakthrough COVID case, so I'm sparing you all my germs this evening.
You're well. Chris McGrath?
Hello, my name is Chris McGrath. I'm the outdoor recreation planner for the Bureau of Land Management Dillon Field Office. I'm based in Ennis there in the Forest Service building. Been working in this position with the BLM for 10 years, did 5 years with Fish, Wildlife and Parks before that, and 8 years as a commercial operator before that.
And John Sampson.
John Sampson became a fishing guide and outfitter in 1993 on the Madison River and Big Hole and Beaverhead as well. I own a fishing, for 25 years, owned half of a fishing lodge called Ruby Springs Lodge in Ruby Valley. In 2016, embarked on a new project to build a new lodge on the banks of the Madison River. Our lodge, the Madison RR, is just upstream of Varney Bridge. We are in our third full season now. We employ about 45 people on the payroll. Excited to be a part of the commission here, the working group, and listen and learn and do our very best to represent the river, the local economy, fishing guides and outfitters, and get a good comprehensive plan moving forward that does its best to work for everybody, including, of course, the Madison River as a recreational plan.
That's great. One question I had, and that's, I just want to make sure everyone in this group has been able to access the Microsoft Teams site and get into the materials that we're distributing. I think that's going to be helpful going forward as we get more updates from the department posting it there. Now, Eileen, I ask your help. Did you want to review the ARM on this?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
If it would be helpful. I do have some copies of the rule, if anybody needs them. Does anyone need them?
Thank you.
So just, I know many of you in the room have been over this before, so I'll keep it really brief. So the rule was adopted by the commission at the end of last year, the end of 2020 in December. And so there's a couple of key things that I wanted to point out. The main focus for the work group is in 12, 11, 6, 7, 10. And within that, it talks about the membership of the group and specifically talks about what the work group would work on in terms of recommendations to the commission. So the main thing here, like Commissioner Walsh mentioned, is, this is an advisory group to the commission. Anything rule change wise, we go through the administrative rulemaking process. If it's fishing regulation related, then that goes through a separate public process. But all of it has to go through a recommendation to the commission. My role in all of that as fish chief is to help facilitate that through the commission. So that's, and for those of you who watch or attend all of the commission meetings, I'm the person who presents on behalf of fisheries. Ken McDonald does wildlife. So that's sort of our role here, is to help facilitate with the commission. So you'll see it specifically calls out recommendations on the allocation, a permit system for new outfitters, rule language for walkway or rest rotation, consequences for permit violations. That's what's currently in the rule right now. So anything that fell outside of that, so for instance, if there was a new rule that you wanted to add in here to the recreation rules, that would have to go through the MAPA process before going to the commission for implementation. And we can talk more specifically on details as to how to do that once you get to that point. So just, it's probably useful to become aware of what is outlined in here in terms of your existing authority for recommendations.
Another couple of things I wanted to point out, for walk weight, which is 6702, and for rest rotation, which is 6706, both of those go into effect January 1 of 2022. So if there was a desire to address those, I would probably recommend addressing those sooner rather than later. If you choose not to make changes, what's currently here in print will go into effect January. Then the last thing that I'm sure all of you are aware is 6705, the commercial use cap. Earlier this year, the commission made a change from implementing that January 2022 and pushed it back to January 2023. So the cap doesn't go into place until next January. Rest rotation and walkway go into effect this coming January. That's the highlights of the rule. It's fairly straightforward. The details that are not in here are things related to, allocation of the cap. If there were to be an appeals process, that's not outlined in here. That would have to be something you would add if that was something you were interested in. So any questions on the rule? I didn't want to spend too much time talking rule language, Mac.
A timing question then. So on the the commercial cap has been delayed till 2023. The rest and rotation, walk and wait stuff has an effective date of January. What's a time frame if that date were to be as part of this whole process holistically? What's the sequence of events, Eileen, that lead the commission to adjust that date, not necessarily the elements of it?
So
Can I just comment on this for a minute? Mac, I'd say this is a topic that, since we set the agenda,
Gotcha.
In the last 4 or 5 days, I've probably received more phone calls on this walk weight and rest rotation issue than anything else. And so our next, Eileen and I were visiting about this before the meeting. We have a window here where we can address this and move it forward to the commission at our meeting on October 28th.
Okay,
And
that was
and we
my
can-
question.
We can then still catch the break book for 2022.
So
Which is what I'd like to do, and I think we could talk about it right now, but I'd like to set a date here, sooner rather than later, like, I think maybe 2 weeks from today is too soon, but depending on your schedules, the week of the 11th or 18th would work for me, or the week of the 20th of September, we wanted to reconnect and do a dedicated meeting. And I'll just say this at the outset, that my philosophy on these meetings is rather than have 12-hour meetings and try to address a whole bunch of topics, I would much prefer to break this down into bite-sized chunks. And I think at this next meeting, we could tackle this rest rotation and the walk weight section in one meeting, allow public to come in for some comment at the end of the meeting, and be prepared to make a recommendation at the 28th meeting of the commission.
Yeah, how that would work is that would be a tentative rule proposal for the commission. The commission then would take action on it, and then the rule would go out for public comment. Then it would go back to the commission as a final item. If we get our timing right, we might be able to get it done by December. Our reg book goes to print January. So that's the timeline here with the new fishing season starting March 1. We're on a fairly tight timeline.
that was the substance of my question. Thank you.
Yeah, once it gets to the commission, I can help drive the recommendation through.
But I guess it would come up at the next meeting, but we would look at altering the implementation date only, because tackling the entire walkway rest rotation methods of managing recreation would influence what we're doing further down the line, whether it's commercial use or, so this next meeting would look at solely implementation date, probably delaying that.
You could look at all the above. I mean, you could look at reversing the action in the arm. Which is
Changing
what
the-
I've heard some appetite to do that.
Changing the implementation date is easier, because we don't have to worry about getting something in the reg book.
Well,
So,
I understand that, but my point is if walk, wade, and resting rotation influence
Yeah.
commercial use or some management technique we come up with down the line, we don't know what that is yet. So
so we'd still go through the same process. If you wanted to change the implementation date, you make a recommendation to the commission.
Right.
Because if you don't change something, what goes into effect in January is what's written in here.
Right.
So if you wanted to change that implementation, again, I would recommend getting it on the commission agenda in October to meet the deadline for the implementation date as it's stated in here.
Yeah,
This goes somewhat to a procedural question, but just trying to get an understanding of to what extent are we subject to the public meeting rules, records keeping, anything like that that we should be cognizant of?
Yeah, so if you're okay, I'll touch
Yeah,
on that.
that's great.
So I probably should have mentioned this. We're recording the meeting, so we've got it up on Zoom. And that's our record keeping. So it is recorded and that will be made publicly available. What we have, typically what we do for these meetings, like we did for the negotiated rulemaking committee meetings, is our recommendation is at the end of every meeting is having a specific time slot for public comment. So how it worked for negotiated rulemaking committee is we had it on the agenda, and you'll see, and I have copies of the agenda if you didn't bring them. You'll see it's right there at the end of the agenda. What you can do is just ask any public interested in commenting to stand up, make comment. You can limit that to a certain time limit or keep it open and free, depending on a tire jar at that point. And then all of that would get recorded and would be part of the public record. And you all will have access to that through we'll post it up on our Teams page, so you can go back and review it. And then we'll also make it available publicly after the meeting. We did have some requests for that, so.
how about if we were to hold another meeting, say on September 20th, just a few weeks out, does that provide us enough time for?
Yeah, we do typically prefer to public notice as soon as possible, just to give the public an announcement of it. But yeah, I think the public notice for this meeting went out sometime last week, so it doesn't have to be a huge time.
Okay, great. Does the group have a preference on meeting dates? As you look out into late September, October?
Calendar. There's no internet.
Oh, there isn't.
No.
Anything prior to October 5th works very well.
Um,
Your week of the 20th sounds good.
And on that week, any specific day of the week?
Works for me.
It's Wednesday today, I think it's the 22nd. Same time. Same time. but like-
Okay.
Did I hear this? This is Jim. Did I hear this correctly? Wednesday, the 22nd?
That's correct, Jim.
Thank you.
Zach?
That'll-
or Friday the 24th.
Are you talking September or October? I missed that. September.
Exactly. And what I'd ask you all to do is get feedback from your constituents or folks in the community and come prepared to make a decision or recommendation. And then I'll carry that forward to the commission. And Mike, I just say, I think, the downstream effects of that are important, yes, but just take that into consideration.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
And it's big, complicated method tackling. I just don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, but down the line, we're trying to.
Maybe the recommendation at the end of the day is to delay it till just heard
I'm,
passionate voices about making changes to the current plan. Okay, so
I like tackling things right away as well. So.
hammer down on September 22nd.
I'll have to zoom in on that.
That's fine.
Same place, same bat time.
Same place, same time. Yeah, good for you.
It may or may not be Dawn and I.
Okay,
So, but we can certainly set it up.
appreciate that. So, Dawn, were you going to lead us through the background of recreational use and trends? And I think we're pretty up to speed, so.
Yeah, main purpose of having this on the agenda was just more than go through the actual numbers and everything, just make you all aware of what resources are out there for your reference as you're considering whatever changes you might be considering. So the historical information, of course, the angler survey information is a big part of that. I think you most all got a copy of this. This was on the team's material as well. We do the surveys every other year, with the exception of, we did it actually COVID year as well, because we thought we're going to see a big drop in use. It turns out it was the opposite. We're analyzing those data now. So we're actually getting a 2019, 2020, and we're on our 2021 survey now. So we'll actually have 3 years straight going forward. Normally, it's just done every other year. I guess about the only other thing I'll say about this real quickly is that I think Commissioner Walsh asked me to prepare this in advance of this, but over the last 20 years, the angling use on the lower river has been relatively stable. The upper river, you can see, has gone up quite a bit with the non-residents. So anyway, those data are available. We've got,
Is this commercial use only?
no, this is total.
Total. And do you have a breakout of commercial versus non?
No. The way we deal with that is, Andrew will talk about that through the SRP permit reporting.
Right, so we just subtract that.
Right.
It's included.
Right.
The numbers here encompass commercial.
Yeah, I get that. Is there any reason why you carry that with more decimal places?
It's just like this Excel spreadsheet. No, actually, we are extremely accurate.
If you're gonna publish that, can you just put the Excel spreadsheet on the website? And we can.
I think it is on there. I think this sheet was just put on there as these are just Excel graphs that I made. So I think on the teams, it's there as a single document, this one page.
PDF, not the actual spreadsheet.
I was looking for the Excel file.
Yeah, I think it's an Excel file.
Do you think it's on the website?
Well, we'll check.
On the teams, the work.
Gotta use the right word, team site.
Yeah, the team site.
Okay, do look at it, make sure it's in there.
Yeah, I think Kim might have PDF eventually put it out there, but we can change that so that it's Rich, is it the raw data you're looking for?
Yeah, on the table that's not under the 6 decimal points.
And then can you also provide separately the data on the commercial use?
Exactly.
So that we can put those two together, or you can add a line in here, part of this would be showing commercial.
John,
We can go back.
I have those.
Yeah, those are up on the team.
I have those. I wanted to talk about this first. I don't know if I can do that.
Sure.
So the angler pressure surveys are conducted, but their data is presented as an entire year, which in 2019 is actually 263,000 days on the Madison. And then it's also broken out by summer, which is May to September. And I think that's what these numbers are for 2019, which show a drop.
These are the entire year license year.
Well, I'm looking at the report and I have 268,000 total user days in 2019, which shows an increase which is an increase from 207,000, which was 2017. So my point is, if you look at this, it shows a drop in 19. If you look at total numbers, I went through every report to 1988, and it's been steadily increasing at 12% a year since 2011. Not our total angler user days in the Upper Madison. And then I also plotted commercial user days against that. Sent that graph to, I think, Brian. I have that. I went through, I did a public information request, got this report, because it's not on the website yet. And went through all those numbers, because in the NRC, I did the same plot. And I think it's important because if in fact, total angler user days across the year, January to December, increased in 2019. Commercial user days declined in 2020. And it's important because it puts us at less than 10% of overall use in total angler days on Madison.
That's
To us,
upper and lower.
So, would that be the request that I produce?
No,
Graphs
I
that
can
have that
see it.
composite?
I got it here.
Okay.
Well, let's get it up on the team site and share with the group.
Okay.
I think the other question I had is this data available by month?
Yes. So I could produce anything you'd like in that regard. That's broken out by month. That's as fine as we do that. The other thing that's of interest to you, the 2021 survey that we're doing now, we also added, we broke out section 2. So now we have a section 3 for above lines bridge. So we're trying to get separate estimates for that. Currently, that's good. We just kind of had to use some focus. That's what that is. Car counters. That's it. So that's the change going forward. 2020 numbers will probably have a draft of those 2 or 3, 4 months. That is from March of 19 through February of March of 20 through February of 21. We're working on the reports for that.
But Mike's got the 20 data, right?
He's got the 19 data. And
Yeah,
it's
the 20 days.
Angler
20
pressure
days is not
survey.
available.
And Mike, we talked about this, but the SRP data is available for 20.
We're gonna have after talking about that.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Just a comment, I think it's gonna be critical that this body arrive at a set of data that we're going to agree on and move forward. If we're a group with 12 watches, we're not gonna get anywhere.
Right.
And it's frankly, it's not that, in the big picture, it's not that important. What we gotta do is just settle on a set of data. And it will help us and it will help you as a commission member going forward. So I don't know what it's gonna take to do that, but competing numbers and graphs and tables and charts is not gonna be helpful. So somehow or another, we need to arrive at that.
Just echoing part of that, I've seen some of the seasonality or month. I think they had some of it in our sheet process.
Yeah.
That showed us the month's usage, because that may help us as we look at what the problem now is, and what we're trying to solve, and how to best do that without unintended consequences.
I do believe the might be in the teams reported that it's for the past public document. It was one of the most recent EA, had a lot of data, and that had some of the seasonal patterns.
Right.
So there is some pretty,
It's around.
yep, and I think there was another useful summary of the SRP data by launch site, so there's some rich data.
Yeah, all of that's in the EA, which is on the team's page.
Is that through 19?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was 2020.
So Mac's totally right. You get one set of numbers, it's the numbers everyone agrees to. I mean, I can produce by month. Request here, as far back, we don't go too far back with that. We used to just summarize this. But we'll do what we can on
Well,
that.
Don, I think it'd be important for 2020, 2019.
The percentages are probably similar as you go from every other year to every other year as far as which months. And so we probably only need to get a few years to get an indication of what the peak months look like.
I
compared to
would
the
suggest you
shoulders.
go back at least one more year from 19, just to get a couple of years before COVID.
Right, exactly.
Because COVID
COVID will have
messed up
very-
things
yeah.
for half the year at least. And then
It amplified not commercial use early in the season when everybody else was working.
Don, I hope you can join us on the 22nd, but that would be a great time to get an update on this.
Okay, sure, should be no problem. Second bit of information I want to make reference to is the car counter surveys. And that's something that is done by Northwestern Energy as part of their FERC license for the river corridor. That's one of the things they do is do those surveys just to get a help with the recreational development and management. They do help on access site development on the river. And so they've actually been doing these surveys since 2005, our county surveys. It's actually a pretty rich data set. They don't do, every 5 years, they do them on every formal access site on the river. And then in other years, they just do indicator sites. So the car counter data is available. Actually, in the EA, we did summarize that a little bit, and it actually fairly well paralleled the angler data, and that is the lower river has actually been fairly stable since 2008 because the analysis they did for me, but the upper river has been increasing. You know, we don't know what each car represented, whether it was an angler or a tuber or what. But, that information is available, and we tried to use some of that in the EA to talk about, suggesting that this isn't a great revelation that there's a lot of a lot more non-anglers in the lower river. It's being the recreational group driving things down there. But those data are available, and they are developing that. They maintain that every year. Creel surveys. That's something that WP does. Of course, the most recent being 2016, and a bunch of that information was used in the EA. You know, that's where we get information on, of course, you know, what people are catching, fish they're catching, their effort. 2016 survey did have a bunch of information on satisfaction, and, I guess, views toward other uses, other anglers on the river. You know, a lot of weight versus boat fishing evaluation or questions being asked there. That information is available. We don't have a real survey scheduled at this point. But that's a pretty data rich survey, and that can be made available as an individual document if that's desired.
How frequently do you do those?
Just as needed basis.
But just a question related to the rule in terms of our scope. It specifically tasks us with commercial trips to outfitters, but there's also commercial use, recreational tubing, which is not an outfitted trip. It also, and point C, we're tasked to address all recreational use on the Madison River. Walkway, transportation. Are we also charged with addressing commercial angling? Is that commercial?
It is within your scope. Then later on the agenda, we have gone down to talk about the survey work that we've had going on this year, which was purposely to capture that non-angling use on the river.
The last bit of information is available. You all should be aware of this. This is also done by Northwestern and their contractor Pinnacle Researches. They actually do the car counters as well, but they've been doing visitor use surveys at these sites since 1994 on a 5-year basis. And they're actually doing it again this year. So this is the 5-year interval right now. That information is, they basically go to the sites and talk to people they encounter at the sites.
Yeah.
And they aren't, probably the main purpose of those surveys is they're looking at condition of how people feel about the condition of the sites, whether it's meeting their needs. But there are questions also on there that address monitoring other users on the river and at the sites, and whether they're meets their expectations for crowding. And so that information's been collected since 1994. I haven't seen any trend analysis on that, but that's a lot of, I would say, really quite relevant stuff to what you're charged with addressing. Some of it's not very specific because they aren't asking, were you on the river or what were you doing? They do ask what you were doing, but it's not as specific as what we were trying to get at in our surveys we're doing this summer, which I'll talk about later.
Are you referring to 2016 Creel surveys?
Yeah. Well,
So,
previously it was.
right, we discussed those, the NRC a little bit. I know Phone wrote a paper on those discussing what we felt was strong bias against outfitters in most all of that entire survey.
Yeah, to say there was universal agreement to interpret those results
Right.
be a stretch for sure. Yeah, so, yeah, if you want to get back into that information, that would be
Yeah.
legitimate to revisit how we were interpreting that.
And I think, and I presented that to the commission in my report on the NRC as well, but I know that the surveys this year that we took all those critiques into account, or at least I hope
Like the Pinnacle survey?
for Madison River surveys that have been conducted since.
And
When will that data be available to us?
which data?
The latest Pinnacle research survey. So there's one.
Well, there's there's one that we're doing right now
Okay.
that's different than the Pinnacle ones. So
Okay.
the one that's going on right now from the department, that's still ongoing, so that probably wouldn't be available till the winter
And
sometime.
I guess that's the case with Pinnacle, although I haven't asked. But I think we should just post on the Teams thing what that survey looks like right now. Just questions that are asked and such.
Yeah, the one that we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm gonna hand out, that for you guys, but we can post that as well. So anyway, again, yeah, in this, it's been out there since 1994. There's questions on reason they chose to go to that site, what they consider to be additional needs at individual sites, satisfaction with facilities, condition of the facilities, opinions about paying for camping, whether what's being charged is appropriate at the time, encounters with other types of users, how that met their expectations.
Love a good look at that. Don, we're gonna have to.
Yeah.
keep moving.
Okay, sure.
Casey, I wonder, in looking at the initial teams page, if all the reports, all the discussions are FWP reports, and I understand that. But since the NRC, and even through the NRC, Paul has been conducting surveys, doing work, keep papers on rest and rotation. I know Brian Keenan's did work on rest and rotation. Did a paper on.
Mike would love to put that up. on the
Well, that's my
website.
question is, I think for us as outfitters, it would be good to share that with everybody. And also non-commercial users, because I think it balances out some of the critiques we had on field survey information and satisfaction survey.
I'd echo that. We hired a biometrician and went through some of that data. Pretty
Yeah.
highly technical comb. And I think the results of that enhance our decision making. It's not to dispute but it was intended to clarify the value of that data and use it. So my understanding is we're free to put something on there. I think we all have a responsibility to not put a blizzard of stuff out there. But I certainly would want to hear from others. You've certainly written some good papers as well on issues. So that's
the team.
That's our job, right?
It's intended to be a data room and a library of information for this group to rely on. And I think, as we get more stuff in there, we'll probably divide it up into folders and maybe phone surveys or surveys, what have you.
But you can all upload anything to that right now.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
I know I uploaded some that was generic.
Okay,
I will.
One data question, may I?
sure.
And it has to do with a discussion we'll have downrange, but I want to know, did we execute an FAS ambassador program on the Blackfoot River this year?
Blackfoot?
Yeah, it's a collaborative program. Region 2 did it in cooperation with, I think, the city of Missoula and another entity. So it's not necessarily a fish, wildlife and parks program.
Who's the point of contact on that?
Randy Arnold is the best one to talk to. He's the Region 2 supervisor.
Okay, thanks.
Dave could speak to that.
Well,
Later on, I've got some of that. I talked to Randy.
Yeah.
And it's the collaborative, Three Rivers Collaborative, U of M, City, County, FWP, and a bunch of nonprofits, including Park Coalition. They call it Missoula River Ambassadors.
Great.
Would you like me to quickly go
Yep,
through this year's
please.
stuff?
Yep.
So what we embarked on this year, once the rules were developed, we saw that the walkway rest rotation, at least currently, is planned to go into effect in January. So we want to make sure we got some pre-data on the river relative to those rules. And so that's what we did this year. We basically focused our efforts on two things. One was putting cameras out to actually try to essentially do a census of boats people on the river. We put cameras out in 7 sections of the river. So that'll be a big job tallying all those up. The other part about it we did was kind of complementing what Northwestern did. We did our own surveys at the BP and BLM access sites, but we focused our questions of those people who had actually been on the river, not or fishing on the river, not just using the site for purposes of their name. So we were very much focused on that, and of course that was to try to be related to the upcoming rules. And I'll hand these out just for your information. I won't even bother to go through these, but these are the surveys we did this summer. We're actually still doing them. We're going to do them through. We started week before Memorial Day. It's a different one. It's one for the upper river, one for the lower. Started before Memorial Day. We're going to the end of September. And we also happy to answer any questions, but essentially we were looking for what people were doing and where. So we did, random stratified sample design. We were I'd be at every site on the river, different times of day, different days of the week, that kind of thing. We also asked questions relative to those sections where they're on, if they were going to be recreating on areas and change per the rules coming up. So there's questions on that. We designed questions that would be used once the rules go into effect to see how they're responding to those changes. So I know you're trying to move on to other stuff and wasn't even planning to get into this.
When will the results be available?
Before the end of the year.
Same. Thank you, Don. And Andrew, are you gonna present?
Yep, you ready for me?
Yep.
Oh. How about it?
Okay.
Some extra copies of.
They made it back over.
Let's proceed, Andrew.
All right, so my name is Andrew Pulse. I am the Region 3 River Ranger and have been for the last decade. And so a big chunk of my job is processing all of these Madison reports and applications every year and then compiling that information. And so that's what I'm going to talk about first off, how we do this every year. So you get an idea of what we do, and then the numbers that I think most of you've seen already, or part of them at least. But just first off, we have, unlike.
Sorry to
most
interrupt.
We have,
Sorry, is this available on the team so those of us online can see what you're looking at, or should we just?
no, I had a PowerPoint ready to go, but we can't do PowerPoints tonight. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to listen to me talk and read my slides from this. So
We could get that.
we can
we
get
can-
it on there, absolutely. It's
we'll
just
post-
not right now.
We'll post it up tomorrow if you get us that. We'll put it on the team's page tomorrow.
Absolutely. So just to start off here, we're lucky because we have a complete record of the use on the Madison, commercial anyway, for the last decade. And that's, we get this information through the annual SRP report logs that each outfitter or other commercial user is required to submit that details each one of their trips over the course of the year. Again, they're required to report all of their commercial activities, each permittee. So I have entered and audited almost essentially every report from 2011 to 2020. And I calculate, confirm the 3% SRP fees, track the use, and pass stuff along to enforcement. So for the standard report processing in a normal year, the first thing I do is I get these reports and applications a lot of times at the same time in the fall. I digitize all of that. So I either copy and paste if I received electronically into a giant spreadsheet, or I manually type it all in if it's handwritten. And then I compare the report cover that details their number of trips and the 3% that they pay in the SRP program of their gross revenue to make sure that everything's accurate. And I will address and correct obvious issues in the reports and with payments at that point if I need to. once we get all the reports entered, then I go through and do a final processing of those reports. And I combine and standardize all the reports into one giant spreadsheet so we can analyze the use. And again, I'm correcting any of the fee errors or any of the report errors. If say somebody enters a trip incorrectly or there's duplicates, things like that, I remove those, fix those issues as I'm going along. And yeah,
When does this occur?
This-
Reports due on.
reports are due on the 10th of January, but by the time all this gets digitized and permits go out first, that's the priority, to get permits out so people can operate
Right.
early in the year if they need to. So that's the first goal. So this is the secondary, after all the permits are out and we have everything entered, that's when this is usually April of the following year that we're doing. So combining and standardizing all the data, correcting reports and fee errors at that point again, and confirming trip counts, removing duplicate trips, combining trips that have been split up in records, removing ineligible zero revenue trips that are reported, and remove trips that are prior to being permitted. So sometimes people are operating out there before they have a permit, those are taken out. Then I prepare enforcement reports and analyze the data so we get an idea of user. For 2019 and 2020, we had, and that's what we're using for allocation, according to the ARM rules, we have complete records of everything, but this is embarrassing from my end. I never tracked use by each individual outfitter in terms of the number of trips, because it was never an important portion of the permit program at that point. It was all based on revenue and 3%. And so that's what we tracked moving forward. We had all this information, but it wasn't readily available to just, oh, here it is right here, and copy and paste it over. So I had to go back through and re-examine each of the 2019 and 2020 reports with the goal of precise and accurate trip counts for each outfitter and as a whole. So I went through everything again and actually came up with a couple other steps of analyzing the numbers, where I was able to tease a few more combined and duplicate trips out and pull out a few more trips. And what I ended up with was what I feel is an extremely accurate, complete data set for 2019 and 2020. So the nuts and bolts of that, the number of permits we had 2019, 2020, 2019, 216 outfitter permits. I see Mike writing down, so it looks slower. 6 non-outfitter permits.
What's that?
So those are like kayak business, people that are not outfitters that have on-river services. So we have, some companies that do scenic trips, things like that. It does not include shuttle companies. That's a different permit. So shuttle permits also have to be permitted under the SRP program. These are not included in these numbers right here.
Just to be clear, for 2020.
This is 2019, so 216 for outfitter, 6 for non-outfitter, for a total of 222. And again, that does not include shuttle permits that are just moving vehicles from site to site. 2020, 225 outfitter permits, 5 non-outfitter permits, and 230 total permits. Then,
Andrew, just to clarify.
yes,
Those outfitter permits include outfitters that done 0 trips.
yes, that includes 0 trip outfitters. Yes, that includes 0 trips. And I can tell you last year, there was, I can give you the numbers of how many had 0 trips. In fact, I had that information, but it's on the slide. That would be too difficult to do this with. So, so trip totals for 2019 and 2020, and this is all outfitters combined. 2019, the total number of outfitter trips was 13,874. Non-outfitter trips in 2019 was 73, for a grand total of 13,947 trips in 2019.
These numbers are all in your PowerPoint.
They are in my part, yeah. Yeah, I got this.
So I don't have to keep track.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
And 2020, we had 13,064 outfitter trips, 89 non-outfitter trips, and 13,153 total trips. So that's the tallies for each year independently. But if you take each outfitter's biggest year out of one of those 2 years, 2019 or 2020. So you basically maximize the number of trips. You end up with 16,173 total trips. Given each outfitter their for their biggest year.
Does this include Madison River Raft Company?
The non-outfitter portion does, yes.
So that's like the 50 tubers and a bus a day? Or how did it?
No, so
how
if
do
you're
you
just,
count those
if you're
trips?
just shuttling, that's, so for example, that Montana Whitewater that you're talking about, they have two different permits. They have a shuttle permit that they use with their bus to go take the tubes out there. Those trips are not included in this. When they're actually guiding on the river, they have another permit that is included in this.
So these numbers do not include
Shuttles.
bikinis going down to.
No, not unless they were guided bikinis on tubes.
Andrew, does a business like Montana Whitewater, do they submit data on the number of like their delivery service that they deliver X number, like they've rented? So they do two businesses, right? You can drive to Bozeman, rent a tube, which would be different than when they bring up, a bus and then hand someone a tube, gives them the speech, stay on the river. Is the number of users that they provide that service to track?
Yes, that's under the shuttle program though. If they're just dropping people off. Shuttling, that's under the shuttle permit. Cheryl deals with all that, and these numbers are not, and those numbers are not included in these data.
But that data does exist.
That data does exist, yes.
Do they pay, does that permit, do they pay per person?
They pay 3%, just like an outfitter does. So they pay 3%, although with the shuttle permit, the BLM sites are not included, or I'm sorry, the FWP sites are not included in it. So those are subtracted from you. They don't have to pay for the shuttling from an FWP site or to an FWP site, only the use of BLM sites. So.
Allison?
No, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Is that, okay. So again, shuttle permits, so that portion where they have the bus and the tubes, not in here, but the portion where they're actually guiding somebody, there's a staff member on hand going downriver with them, those are included in this. And again, that's a very small portion. So you're looking again, for last year, 89 out of 13,153 trips for the non-outfitter.
Is it possible to get access, the companies that are providing delivery service, shuttling, dropping off X number of users? Is it possible for us to gain access to that?
I would assume you'd have to ask Cheryl. I don't know. She does all of the shuttle stuff, so I don't know.
So to answer, so the plan is to include that information in our report with what Dawn spoke about earlier. On that, within the rule, we're charged with getting a better picture of the non-angling use of the river. So that's a component of that. So that will all be included in that report.
And we might need to type that.
It'll be
End of the
end
year.
of the year. Winter.
One other thing with these numbers that I just want to point out is that this is a count, right? This is an actual tally of the number of trips that occurred. This isn't an estimate. Whereas if you're looking at those angling estimates, that is an estimate. So when you say that you can subtract this number from that 200,000, whatever, and end up with a number of non-commercial, I would say that's, this is a count versus an estimate where we don't have confidence intervals even for that. So it's not.
But that's
apples
the
to
only number
apples.
we have.
It is, but it's not, it's like the apples to apples, it's apples to oranges, essentially.
And to clarify that the process for gathering that's krill data, so considered by the krill data set.
The angling survey, you'd have that on.
It is the method of collecting that data been consistent over the last, let's say, 10 years. In other words, so that's not as precise as the count data about, but if the data collection has been consistent, the trends should be.
Trends, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But what I'm saying is you can't just subtract one number from the top and end up with this is X number of non-commercial users, because it could
They're
be,
two different.
yeah, it could be 100,000, it could be 500,000,
Would that be accurate that the method of that non-angling angler day, the way that's been, is that been consistent?
It's all been male surveys
Yeah.
Yeah, the angler
since
surveys.
35 years.
Same,
So
same.
Yeah, it's been consistent.
I think it speaks to the definition of an angler day versus one nose on a bus.
Oh, yeah, just clarification. So an outfitter, it's not BLM to BLM, it's every, I mean, so like in the shuttle, they're only paying their 3% on BLM access.
Right.
Where the outfitter pays for every.
Outfitter pays for you, yes, yeah,
Yeah,
outfitter pays for everything. Yeah, yeah, no matter what site they use.
So
Yes.
just to clarify.
Yeah, and so the way that works in the shuttle, Cheryl, just basically, if it's, if there's one FWP site, you pay 1.5%. And so if it's both BLM sites, then it's the full 3%. If it's FWP to FWP, they don't pay anything from the shuttle. It doesn't, there's no 3% associated with it.
Any questions out in the Zoom land?
Several, including I better make it to the next one.
Sorry, I have one
Oh,
more
yeah,
question. Is there ever a report given, because the idea, my understanding is with the SRP and the collection of the 3% was to maintain the sites. So is there ever a report of where that 3% goes and what it's used for? Because that could be data that would be helpful when we look at a fishing access site management.
Cheryl would be the one to talk to about that.
Okay.
And she knows, but when we've talked about this in the past, it's hard to track a dollar because it all goes into the general fund and then it gets
Yes.
redistributed. So it's,
Yeah, so that 3% is treated just like your fishing license dollar money. So there's, was it 50 cents from every fishing license is supposed to go to fishing access sites. It all goes into the one general fund. I manage that budget. We spend a lot more on those sites than the 3%. From maintenance, staff, acquisitions, large capital projects. So, but it's for the staff, we've got Andrew, we've got Cheryl that cover the recreation program within Region 3, and then there's the fishing access site staff on top of that.
I just think it's important to understand that even from a non-commercial payer use. So when the fee is either through a fishing license, their taxes, or a camping site fee for a non-commercial at an access site.
Yeah, so all of that money goes into what we call the general fund pot. And the one thing that you'll hear often from the department is really what funds us is non-resident elk licenses. That's the fishery spends a lot more than the money we bring in.
And we have access to LWCF for our fishing access sites, right? Land and Water Conservation Fund
For acquisitions.
For acquisitions, yeah.
and not development.
Not a, no.
Thank
It's not to say that they couldn't apply for that. I mean, I think that the improvement of sites.
So there's two different issues. There's the fund and then there's the authority. So we have to get both appointed through the legislature. But right now, there's no LWCF authority for the capital development that you're talking about.
Sure. So that's usually where an agency, private entity relationship.
Yeah, funding of improvement of the access sites is
Yeah.
a whole other topic.
Okay.
I mean, I think tonight's chart, I just want to get the accumulated thoughts that everyone has on how we can reduce traffic or social conflict on the river. That
So these are all great questions. What I would suggest for all of you is if you have a really specific question for data or information needs, post it on the Teams page. And then that way I can track the information down for you. So if there's something, whatever it is, if there's something real specific, just post it on the Teams page. And that's probably the easiest way. And, I've got several staff monitoring that, and we'll make sure we get the information posted for you.
So I'd like to return for a few minutes to kind of defining the problem that we're trying to solve as a group. We've got the arm here. I thought it would be helpful particularly for the staff, but for others in the meeting, to get a perspective. I asked Brian to share with us his perspective on where the Upper Madison, particularly the Madison River, fits within the scope of the global fishing community. Just how special a resource this is. So if you don't mind, Brian.
Sure. So, one of my great hopes through this process is to preserve the experience that is provided on the Madison, specifically the wild trout angling. And while there's a lot of great recreational opportunities that Madison provides, and certainly, it's great to get anybody outside and tube, and those things are wonderful. The Madison in particular in the world is kind of like one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's people make a pilgrimage to this river. If you ask someone in London that enjoys fishing for trout, where are their dream bucket list locations they would like to someday visit? They might mention New Zealand, they might mention Alaska, Bristol Bay, they might mention Patagonia, and Montana is in that same category, in that same conversation. And I would argue that Madison's the marquee, most famous fishery that we have in our state. And for those of us that love the river for our own personal recreation, but also, make a living sharing an experience with it, it is also part of the brand of our state. And I hope that in 70 years, when Bozeman's 500,000 people, that we could still look at the river and feel proud that we were part of the process to ensure that our grandkids can, still put it on a pedestal equal to Bristol Bay and New Zealand and Patagonia. So I think there's a lot. It's not just any river, in my opinion. It's a very unique and special river in the world.
Tim, you have anything to add to that?
I would just perhaps echo being in the business hospitality. We have guests coming from all over the country to fish Montana, and many of them, probably for us, 50–60% come back every year, bringing their families and friends and others. So maintaining that experience is critical, and it's vital. We've got an unbelievable fishery out there, but also just the experience of being in Montana and such. And I think even though we have crowds and it's picked up, people are still wanting to go to Montana, experience that. We have to figure out how to balance that.
John, you've got a relatively new lot. Interested in your perspective.
Relatively new and at the same time been for nearly 30 years in this neighborhood of the Madison River. I mean, I think what Brian and Dan said is spot on. It's a special resource. We're lucky to have it. We're lucky to be sitting around this table tonight and try to make some decisions that preserve this. And there's no question that we've got some headwinds: population growth, climate change. Buy into that. Believe it. Certainly seems like things are getting warmer. But I think everybody around this table, I've known a lot of you for a long time. I'm really encouraged that we're going to have some success in not only representing the local people of the Madison Valley that feed their kids and put the kids through college with the resource of the Madison River, but also doing the right thing and making compromise and inconveniencing ourselves when necessary to do the right thing for the community.
So as we think about the problem that we're trying to solve, with this work group, I mean, we have evolving rules and regulations for the Madison before us. We've got this broader issue of recreational use that was kind of left open by the last commission on this topic. And then there's really the unspoken topic underlying all of this, which is fish health, and to the extent that the fishing pressure becomes too extreme, that probably the fishing experience for recreational and commercial users really doesn't work if the fish aren't healthy and taken care of. Do all of you feel like the job before us is perfectly clear in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve?
The job is clear. What the details are, how we get there is anything but clear. We're going to come up with a plan at the end of this. It's not going to appeal to everybody. There's such a wide spectrum of different thoughts that really are emotional and polarizing for people. And so I think we know what our goal is, but I think there's going to be lots of conversations about what works best to get to that goal.
Yeah, I think that, I think there's going to be an easily shared goal toward conservation of the resource and how to describe steps to accomplish that, measure that, and agree upon what a healthy stock looks like. That, I think, check that box. Where we're gonna, in my opinion, could run into some difficulty is understanding the allocative aspects of controlling public use. You read in almost any national paper and we see Bozeman is the fastest growing community of its size in the nation, and soon to exceed its little box that it lives in now, and will become the smallest of the next big populations. And those are the things that drive the train. This won't be solved, of course, by regulating one segment of the use, the guided use. We're not going to solve anything. But I do think the conservation elements, fish abundance, size and age, size of the catchable population, catch rates, are all things that are measurable and definable and likely agreeable to describe what historic performance looks like. And deviation from that is usually a product in a catch and release fishery of effort. And then we decide that everybody shares equally in the burden of conservation proportional to their impact. So if you're a 10% impact, 10%, 90% of the impact, 90%. So I think there's ways to map through this. The conservation one, I think, could be easily shared. How we equitably describe limits on activity obviously be the challenge, but I get the sense regardless of whether that solves a problem or not, we're going to move ahead and do it, or at least examine it. So, Mike, anything to add?
No, as we were talking here, the last 5 minutes, Fund has undertaken a new project. In that project, scrape the rust off our mission statement. And our mission statement from Fund has always been since 1978 the resource first. And coming to this meeting tonight, I was talking to the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association about managing recreation on rivers, what they're doing in Idaho, on rivers specifically. And they haven't sat on what they're doing in Oregon. And it came really quick to that commercial use in all these other states and seemingly annually on the Madison as well is a portion, a smaller portion of perceived use. And it's the elephant in the room is trying to manage recreation use. And it's not unique to going through it. Like I said, I know wise for us to look at those things. See if we can-
I think, I agree with Mac that maintaining the fishery is the prime goal here, defining, how much angling pressure the river can take before the fishery starts to decline. That's, hopefully we can get data for that. One thing I can say under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, by law, whatever the regulatory agency, the DLM or whatever is controlling that section of the river, has to define a visitor capacity. It's not like we have to redefine the wheel. This has been done before. We might be able to learn something from what the DLM has done under Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to define what a visitor capacity is.
Allison, anything to add?
I agree with everything said, and I think the bottom line is the experience, and I think just people, we happen to live near the fastest growing county and next to the fastest growing county, and with that becomes a moral and social obligation to manage the people. It's uncomfortable. I don't want to take why I moved or to walk out my back door and do whatever I want to do any day of the week. But I really don't see, I totally agree, we can't manage one without the other, and just hope I can bring some non-commercial perspective. I have a good idea, obviously, with commercial for the other half of my income, but I really want to get people to understand it has to come from everybody, and this is a people management issue as well as an industry and management issue. We need to be able to be okay with that, because maybe why you moved here is to get away from people, but that's not. So, and I agree. We want people to come here for the Madison River, not because there's so many people, and it's like everything else and out of control and lost control.
For you to have clients say, I don't want to fish the Madison anymore, it's too crowded.
Right.
I guess along the lines of perfection is the enemy of progress. Several of you suggested that we should really determine tonight how we're going to vote as a group and make final decisions. I think the NRC really got hung up with the consensus process. And I'd like to throw out that we just do this on a 3/4 vote, on a final vote, that maybe not everyone's in total agreement. I hope we are, but we're going to have to keep moving forward. If we're going to make timely recommendations to the
I like that idea. That's a majority, sort of a super majority vote. Something that we employed, I chair the Legislative Sportsman's Caucus Advisory Council. And one of the things we employed there was the 3/4, and that's fine. But we also provided a dissenting opinion so that the context or the sort of the argument was provided to decision makers, so that you had it. It would be a record of the decision, and I encourage us to be able to, on a vote like that, hey, yeah, it went 3/4 this way, but here's the dissenting opinion.
I would agree, again, we don't make the rules, we make recommendations.
Right.
So it would be a dissenting opinion, would be a useful.
To a commission member, exactly. And it's a record of that decision. Clean it up. Just thought, I'd throw it out there.
Just something to clarify, this is the lawyer in me.
Yeah.
But when you talk about 3/4, is it 3/4 of those present voting? Is it 3/4 of the 12? So you're basically saying 9 votes.
What do you recommend?
I would go with 9 out of 12, not because if we have somebody who can't participate either remotely or here, I'm not real interested in seeing that vote count go down. I think a super majority, 9 out of 12 people would be my recommendation.
Would we allow proxy votes? I don't think it's going to come in this.
Hopefully with Zoom today, if somebody's traveling, they can still connect in and vote remotely.
I think there's optics that are important as well to the public. Yeah. If we can't gain 9 people to support a recommendation, how strong is that recommendation?
Yeah. and build support there as well.
If we're gonna have a fixed number, then it really enhances the obligation each of us carry to be here. 100%, that's our job.
Eileen, as a work group, do we need to take a formal vote on this?
That is entirely up to the work group. It's-
Lawyer?
Well, and unless we may be taking some action tonight or recommendations, but we can always revisit our rules. We establish how we want to operate, or
I think this one's really important, so I guess I would ask for a motion.
I'd make a motion that actions of the task force require 9 affirmative votes of the 12 members.
Second that.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
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 Yeah,
Issue of
thank you.
minority report from the amendment.
Aye.
The dissenting opinion.
I accept that and put it in our amendment.
He's accepted it.
Okay, even though we already voted on it.
So I would recommend that whoever wants to take the lead is just write out a rough, what you decided on, call it a charter, and we'll post that on the Teams page, so it's
Okay.
up there, so just whenever you have that drafted and ready to post, just send it to me and we'll put it up there.
One of the things I thought was effective that we started to do in the NRC and it quickly fell apart, but we did in the Madison CAC in 2012 was if you have a no vote or a dissenting idea on it, you need to either provide that as an alternative or just you can't just say no.
The Upper Yellowstone Task Force had a similar process of trying to reach consensus, but if you had an objection to it, you were to come to the table with ideas, alternatives.
Right.
But perhaps, Casey, if you'd like, working with Eileen here, I can draft just what we approved here.
Perfect.
Write that out for, but then maybe give a little more thought to a little additional guidelines for us to consider.
Great.
At our next meeting.
Thank you. Perfect. So next topic is the fishing access sites. I'd like to take just a 2 or 3 minute break if we could and reconvene, say in 3 minutes.
How are you, my man?
Doing very well.
Good,
How are
good.
you?
Peachy. Peachy. Doing good. Yeah, it's good.
For lack of a better idea, unless someone has a better idea, I thought we just marched down the access sites on the river, and I can't say I've visited these sites twice in the last. Let's keep it down and just, we've got a very limited amount of time to get through this, but I know we have important feedback on certain sites, but not all. I'm kind of interested in the group's feedback on Reynolds Pass. It seems that if we do change the rule or whatever we decide in our meeting on the 22nd, it might influence the feedback we give the department on that one site. Me, when I look at it, it doesn't look like it's prepared for additional boat traffic right now, but is everyone around the table good with tabling that until the 22nd?
I think that's wise.
Okay.
And I would add time view
Okay,
because.
exactly. Yep.
That's
Okay, so we'll skip down. Then I think next stop is Lions. Is that correct?
Well, can we back up a minute?
Yep. You bet.
Why?
Well,
Mind you?
So I guess the rationale, so I went through and made, I talked to several other outfitters and guides and, you know, access by access, and then I also try to prioritize them. And then when I got to Reynolds Pass and viewed where the level of priority and the recommendations depend on, you know, if this trial period persists, if you're not gonna have long-term float fishing allowed, certainly if float fishing becomes a regular thing, with Reynolds Pass will become wildly popular as a launch site. And if you do a one-year trial, or if we deem that maybe that was a bad idea, it definitely changes the needs of that site.
I understand the reason to omit Reynolds. Because the water from Reynolds to Pine View is challenging, it's not as fished. But I disagree with throwing Pine View out because it's heavily used, it's primitive, it's.
And I should
mess
say,
regardless of what we do with
I should back up and say,
Walkway.
we should address both of them in terms of recommendations but the frame of, are they gonna be, in the long term, float fishing, access?
No,
and
I
take out-
understand that, but even Pine View now, not being a float fishing area, is
Yeah.
heavily used.
Yes, but it would be even more heavily, so if long-term, where it doesn't pass the muster and it stays sort of status quo, then it will still need improvements. But that might be like a single concrete ramp and a smaller parking area. If we're gonna have long-term float fishing, we might need to have a much larger parking
Right, and
area.
I'm saying, regardless of what we do with float fishing, Pine View should be.
I agree.
So let's start with Pine View.
It's a primitive, it's.
Let me first pause, and I meant to, I asked Dave Hemline and Jay Poppy to join us. Jay is responsible for the fishing access sites in this region, and we're really giving our feedback to you.
Okay.
So.
Pine View is not FWP property, you probably know that. I believe it's MDT property, so that would be.
Right, it's similar to mile 26 on Yellowstone, that was like a pioneered site.
Yeah. Yeah, without the public-private dance that we did the last couple of years.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
but at Pine View, it's possible, I guess, we could, come to an agreement with MDT for a recreation easement kind of thing, like we're pursuing with 26 mile, but that's not on the table right now at all. That would be a process. I think.
Is that Northwest Power and Energy you're saying owns that land?
MDT, Montana Department of
Montana Department of Transportation. Thank you very much.
Well, without belaboring this, if anyone around the table has specific feedback on Pine View.
Hey, I've got a question on Pine Butte. Is that 100% DOT or is that also partially private?
I'm not clear on that, Chris. I don't
Because
know.
I'm pretty sure a big chunk of that's on private and there's the MDT easement.
Casey,
Yes.
if I could, I'd just bring your attention a paper I put on the site, August 23rd draft, and I suppose probably similar to what Andrew did. We engaged a bunch of people, and that's what I'm gonna be editing for my notes off of this thing. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yep, right? Yep. All right, I mean, you should have that and should help us walk down through it. I've got really only minor ownership in the elements and structured it just so we can have a robust discussion.
I think the first thing on Pine View is define it. Because there are several ways to get into Pine View. It's pulling off the shoulder. It's
Yeah, it's just a 2-track.
yeah, it's wide west. So,
It's 5 flows.
Find out who owns the land if we can expand it.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
One thing I think that's real, we should frame this entire conversation with is also assigning priority levels. The reality is these things cost a lot of money. And we're not going to tackle all of the recommendations. And say, these might be a 10-year process. We saw, if we look at what was in the river, it seems like every other year, every third year, they tackle the ruby and then, windy point. So part of the recommendation also would be, this is the most pressing, top priority. This is
Right,
priority
exactly.
number 2.
Andrew, that would be something that would be okay to do after we kind of run through a sweep, so we know the scale we're talking about. The whole. I mean,
Make
we're
a
not
wish
gonna
list
sign
of each
cus-
site and then come back. And do the
Yes,
same thing.
exactly, then we prioritize.
Next stop, Lions. I see on your sheet, high priority, probably highest priority.
That's what it came up as.
Andrew, is that the most trafficked boat site on the upper Madison River?
Launch,
Lions?
absolutely, because, it's far and away it's got the most launches, but if you look at all of the use of the site takeouts, it has very, very, very few takeouts for obvious reasons.
Sure.
If you look at Barney downriver, I would imagine if I added up, it would have more use, but it's 2 times a day, basically,
Gotcha.
launch and takeout.
Yeah.
And there's
And
like
the reason
38
is it attracts from Idaho, West Yellowstone, Big Sky, and it's, everybody has access to it.
There was like 3,800 trips that launched at Lions last year, if I remember the numbers correctly, out of 13,000.
And Lions
Thank
is
you.
actually the most used. County boat for the-
And for those who haven't seen it, it has 2 ramps side by side. It's got sort of a staging area where people rig up and then you launch your boat and then you go park your boat back in the back lot.
As a point of clarification, that's actually on Forest Service ground, that we manage basically just the parking lot. The parking lot on the left as you're pulling into the latrine, just that parking area, 2 boat ramps. The rest, is used for West Fork winter stuff. That's where the trail grooming starts.
I believe there's 1 latrine there. Is that true?
Just one.
Yeah, I mean, with the amount of traffic, I wonder if a men's room and a ladies' room or 2 latrines or,
We pump it regularly.
yeah.
And one distinct thing to understand about Lions is, so in terms of total cumulative use in the upper river, it's 14.9% of all the use in the upper. Varney, as Andrew mentioned, is 14.3, it's just behind. However, Varney is used about equally for put-ins and later in the day takeouts. Whereas Lions, it's 3,604 launches, but only 75 takeouts. And so you have a massive influx because it also serves the longest uninterrupted reach. It's about 6 miles to the next access. So it's the first float fishing access, and it also serves the longest reach that you can't get to besides putting it Lions. So as a result, it experiences the biggest morning, traffic of any launch in the river.
And as we're sticking to task here, are we getting feedback that parking problems, congestion, what are we hearing? I know what I see when I go up there, but what are folks hearing about Lions? How might we improve it?
So the one is that, it has 2 ramps, 2 really nice ramps. But because you have double the morning launch activity of any other site, there sometimes, you're waiting if you're there at the peak time to launch a boat. One of the other challenges at Lions is the 2 ramps are at the very bottom of the property. And so there is some delay. You can think of each ramp as like a drip into the river, right? It takes a certain amount of time to back your truck up, launch a boat, and then you also have to then moor your boat, park it while you park your truck, and then walk out the back. So there's a time process, and there's like one spot below the bottom ramp where you can park a boat, and then if the river compresses and it goes up the bridge, the current picks up. Even at low flows, you really can't get more than a boat below it. And the ramps are kind of side by side, so then you kind of have to go above the upper ramp. And there's a couple spots there, but you're walking and pulling boats up into the current. And at high flows, that's really challenging. And at low flows, it's also kind of challenging because it's, you start to get kind of rocky. So one suggestion, several outfitters, I talked to Joe Delschneider, I talked to Dan Delecta, I talked to John Lay, several of our guides, is to consider a 3rd ramp on the upper end of the property to provide more injection points, but also to make it easier to lock the loads down versus dragging.
That makes great sense.
If you'd reference that thing on Lions, that's the first element that we captured, I think, from those discussions.
Yeah,
So move the boat ramps, either move the boat ramps to the upper end of the access. It's much easier to bring them down. And then remove the lower ramp entirely and improve the area for rigging. So the concept was exactly what you said, capture the advantage of the current and all that constraint. But I think that's the kind of recommendation we're trying to come up with. I just need to know if we got it.
No, I think that's really good. What about you, Jay? I mean, is there a potential to expand parking on the Forest Service lease?
We would have to just work that out with the Forest Service. It's a possibility, for sure.
What would you estimate the cost of additional ramps?
About 60,000.
Okay.
It depends on the exact kind. If we did a full concrete slab, those are the most expensive and most durable, as opposed to the planks or the mats. They just don't last as long. So we're moving away from the other types and going more to solid push-in slabs, poured in place and then pushed in.
If I could interject,
Yeah, John.
what I've noticed is that there generally is room to park at Lions, because even though there's this huge amount of launch traffic, shuttle drivers are picking up the rigs, they're moving them down constantly, and I've never been there, and even in peak July, where you can't find a place to park. The problem is the shuttle drivers move them all down to Windy Point and Palisades. There's enough places to park at Palisades that absolutely is not at Windy Point. And Windy Point's dangerous. It's a quick pull in. You know, we had a fatality going into Palisades this year, pulling off the highway. And so Windy Point, that needs significantly more parking. And that's, to me, that's the most critical ramp we have that needs a fix quickly, Windy Point. You have people floating from Lines down to Windy, and those shuttles just, they build up, and then everybody gets off the river between 2 and 4. So by 5 o'clock. So by 2 o'clock, it's a huge amount of boat traffic.
the ramps are pretty nice.
Yeah.
It's the part.
Yeah, and it's a nice concept. You pull down, you put it on, and you go park above. There's just not enough parking.
So what do we need? Are we off of Lions now?
Well, let's just hammer down this. Dave, any other feedback on Lions?
No, I agree with everything that was said about Lions. Brian's point in terms of getting a smooth traffic flow with that. If there was launches up at the south end of it, so you walk down, saves a lot of time, we're trying to move people, relieve tension and anxiety. So I think you can do it to shorten that period of time. Sometimes somebody will be, if you gotta drag your boat all the way up, you're 5 minutes before you get back to your car, and in 5 minutes, 6 people can launch. So that's critical, I think.
I'm not sure what would be accomplished by pulling the boat ramps out that are already there and function well. That's just costing money. Why not just add more out?
And you're talking about adding one downstream.
Upstream, up at the top of the property.
Okay, got it.
David, do you know how far upstream does that property go beyond the train and the turnaround?
Into the forest, sir, onto the forest, quite a bit of land. If I remember correctly, yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Well, the concept that we were presented with was the notion of improving access at the upper end of the site at the expense of those lower ramps potentially. And then taking that space and increasing it for rigging. So that was the notion behind basically moving the ramp.
Yeah, I don't think that, it's gonna cost a lot of money to pull it out. Right?
Well, I think, do you mean rigging before you put the boat in? Like a rigging lane?
Yeah,
or
because you're
something like
lacking
that?
some of that space right now. And so the concept was, it's exactly what Andrew was saying. Brian was saying, you need the notion of, not fighting the current, right? And the launches need to be on the upstream end of it, not the downstream end. And as you move that up, you free space up for that critical rigging space.
So rigging parallel to the river,
Mhm.
downstream of the newer
Mhm.
upper ramp
Correct.
or ramps.
Correct.
You have Lions is one of the few places you actually have a lot of rigging space. And you need that because you need a lot of rigging space on land. And if, I think the rigging is actually fairly efficient.
I agree with that.
Good, and
I mean, we just said be adding another boat ramp and then creating some rigging space for that boat ramp as well.
or you could use all the same rigging space. It
Yeah.
depends on how far up it depends on how far up that third ramp.
Are we confusing what we call rigging space in two different ways? What I'm hearing is the rigging space in the parking area before you launch.
That's right.
Getting ready. And then the area, once you've launched your boat, you moor it, and now you're getting your guests into the boat. That's the
So
second.
the rigging, I refer to the rigging spaces where you park your vehicle to prepare, to put your anchor on and unstrap the boat. Maybe rig some flies.
In the parking lot.
Yeah.
And that's really not the parking lot.
Not
That
the
area is
rigging
100%
space.
rigging, and the parking lot is.
Everybody's
further
lined
inland.
up there waiting to get.
Yeah, and I don't know what the
Exactly.
number is, there's room for about 10 rigs right there to line up, and then when everybody's ready, you just
You just
go
go
on
back
in.
in, yeah.
It's not like you have to sit in a line and wait. The cars are stacked like that, and when you're ready to go. I mean, it's actually set up fairly well, we could just use it.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that what we're settling on? It's an additional boat ramp?
And a latrine.
And another latrine. Never have too many latrines.
And that would be, on my ranking list was like in the second highest priority list. It's a pretty high.
Lions or the latrine.
Let's move on to Windy Point. We started there.
Casey, this is Jim. I missed some of that comparison between rigging versus what was it?
Mooring, yeah.
Oh, okay. Or when you're in the river, after you've gotten the boat in the river. Is that right? Gotcha. Thank you.
Any additional points on Windy Point? So you
More
mentioned
parking.
there was a fatality there.
Somebody pulling into Palisades, there was a fatality on the road, a young gentleman who's.
The boat ramps are relatively new, and so is the current parking area, and they're quite nice. It's a double ramp. You can launch two boats simultaneously, or take two boats out simultaneously. But the parking area is.
We could double the parking and it would be used.
And is that a possibility, Jay?
That's the BLM site.
It's a BLM site. We've got fairly limited access to there because it's topographically steep on one side and private property on the other, but we'll definitely look at it. Because I agree, it absolutely parking. I mean, we overflow it every day of the week, pretty much all year.
Thanks, Chris.
That'd be
So
helpful. Thank you.
we're just providing feedback for you tonight.
I appreciate it.
Palisades.
So Max just asking about the fatality and the approach, and the Madison County Sheriff is very aware. So I wonder if we could get the Department of Transportation or whomever to have flashing signs that say vehicles entering highway or whatever the terminology is on either side out on the highway, warning people.
Specifically to Palisades.
All of it, every single one where there's a quick turnoff, which would be, Story, McAtee, Windy, Palisades, Lines already has a big rest area there, but I think just for safety. I think Jim Hart, something like that.
We have one of those at the McAtee turnoff for the mining, do they? Are there any trucks or signs about trucks entering?
No.
Probably would be something to inquire about.
Okay. That's a DOT issue. How about more feedback on Palisades?
Palisades, nice, big,
Yeah.
with lots of parking.
Yeah, lots of
We need another, go ahead, Brian.
I would, relative to everything else, I think Palisades is just underwent a massive, improvement, and relative, it's one of the best sites we have. Doesn't mean there can't be minor improvements there, but. there's a
What
lot
about
of
after you
higher-
launch and then you go park, and I wonder if some of that brush could be cleared out downstream of the boat ramp so that people would have easier access. I remember last time I launched, walk through a bunch of willows to get to my boat. Which I moved downstream.
One of the, excuse me,
Well, the mooring issue, I think, is really important. Beach boat and Palisades, there's not a lot of mooring room down the river.
Yeah.
And so you end up dragging it down the river until the anchor bring it back in. So the general idea of providing mooring for launches and takeouts at the appropriate place, the mooring for a takeout's got to be upstream, or should be, and mooring for a put in. You'd like it to be downstream if possible. Otherwise, you get cross. But I think that's true.
And at Palisades, there's lots of bank, but it's heavily brushed in.
Yeah.
So it just,
Seems like it can't fix.
it is, yeah. They're big brush on it.
so what's the,
It's the riverbank to consider that does stabilize. the
Yeah,
bank.
of course.
so no changes to the ramp, and then what's the recommendation then?
If possible, to clear some brush for,
You could even do a
Specifically downstream.
pathway through the brush
Yeah,
that you clear and not,
I wonder,
So
not
that
clear
brings it
cut
from-
the whole thing.
That
yeah.
brings it from the parking area to the ramp? Is that what you're trying to do?
The parking. no,
well, like, so
parking
like you walk your boat
from the
down and
ramp
there's like 4 boats
downstream.
below you and you end up being the
I
fifth
see.
boat down. And
Gotcha.
you need to get back to your truck. Like you're either wading back up to the river or you're trying to like bushwhack through thick willows.
That's right.
So if
So-
you maybe if you cut a few lanes
That's
at every 10 feet, with a
That'd
small
be
trail through, so you're not completely destabilizing the banks, but you make it easier in and out.
It'd be really clear when you're going to moor, you just anchor your boat in front of one of those lanes. There might be 4 lanes that you
Gotcha.
cut through the brush.
So it's a mooring issue, as Dave was talking
something to
about,
look at.
and it's just a matter of brush.
That's
What,
Yeah, that's not our problem.
that's not ours, but yeah.
Oh, so
It's
yeah,
not ours.
that's the BLM site, okay.
you see,
Yeah,
there's one general principle for me is that the mooring, launching stuff and traffic flows, they're the most important thing. I don't go to the fishing access sites for the aesthetics. And so frankly, if we have to clear a few trees through one section to make mooring more efficient, the environments and the surroundings of the river whack it right away as soon as you get going. But that traffic flow and getting people out of there, that to me is the key. So anything we can do. to improve that.
thank you. How about Ruby?
Ruby's good. Well, that's Brian's neighborhood.
That's one of that was recently renovated.
Yeah.
And that's one of the better sites.
I don't know about the latrine counts. I don't pay attention.
You have 12 from Meadow Lake to Reynolds.
And most of these ramps are 1 latrine per ramp. Is that true?
And it has 2. Everybody else has 1, except for the portables that we're now putting at $3 on the other side of the bridge. We considered putting a regular latrine there, but it's very culturally sensitive. It's hard for us to dig holes there.
Got it.
Native American.
Old McAtee.
McAtee could use either a double ramp or a second.
Could use a second ramp and the parking at McAtee is, people get, it's not clear how you're supposed to park your rig. Is it supposed to be perpendicular to the fence, parallel to the fence? And then you end up getting from day to day sort of different results in how people park their rigs. I believe there's
The chain
enough,
reaction or gets it
Right,
first.
right,
So
right.
Someone holds it next to the.
right, I believe there's enough space at McAtee. You can always use more space at all the ramps, especially as we're trying to manage this recreational plan for 50 years from now. The more space at every ramp, the better, or at every launch site. But I don't know how we would maybe come up with a way of more clearly defining how people should.
If you pave and stripe, that's an obvious one, like Windy and Powell. Are there, signage, if you just keep it gravel, maybe you have some like hidden parking where you get provide guidance.
And maybe maybe that's happening there because it's too much of a sort of a corridor, a long rectangle going down to the river, rather than just be widened a little bit more space. Who owns that?
We do. It's pretty small, actually, where we that jack leg on the right.
Yep.
The wired jack leg.
Yep.
That's due to be replaced as well, by the way.
And that's on the property boundary, that
That
jack,
is,
right?
yeah. So there's not a whole lot there. That ramp was, let's see, that ramp was new ramp about 7-8 years ago, maybe, not that long ago.
It's pretty heavily used. I mean, yeah, it's not as heavily used as, you know, Barney and Lions, but it's up there. It's more heavily used than Windy. It's about equal distribution of more takeouts than launches.
So the recommendation that's coming down is widen the existing ramp or
Add a ramp
or an additional
and add a
one.
ramp and use every single square footage of space that FWP owns in there for parking.
And then parking management needs to be addressed to optimize the parking layout. That's a combination of painted lines, signage, that sort of thing. Okay.
Casey, one question. This is Jim again. Is that Fish, Wildlife and Parks or is that DNRC property?
It's, we have an agreement with DNRC for that corner that's on the west side of the river.
Gotcha.
Story.
Yeah, it shows, it's a little unclear on the east side of the river exactly whose that is. I know what cadastral shows or Onyx shows is that it's FWP. There's also a blue state land sign over there. And I know people do launch on that other side, the east side occasionally, it's rough. But I've had conversations with the DNRC Bozeman unit manager, they believe it's theirs on that side.
Good, send them the bill.
Story is like 2/3 takeout and 1/3 launch. It's more heavily used. It's pretty heavily used.
It has the worst ingress, egress, dirt road out of any of the launches. Just terrible washboard.
And staging the launch or takeout is kind of like a little, it's like also like a little bank. And then you kind of go on the top of the head gate. So if there's a couple, there's not very many boats, then you can kind of go into the top of your irrigation ditch, and that's really slow current. It's kind of come in as a flood. If you have to park in the river, it's kind of brushy upstream.
Is that a BLM site? That's a BLM site? Storage?
Yeah, that's a BLM site.
Yeah. So you guys improved that road once upon a time about 4 or 5 years ago, right?
That was the Ruby Creek Road. We paved that road. We do have the road into Story on our maintenance list. It's on our deferred maintenance list. It's one of our priorities. It's about 2 to 3 years out. Mostly.
Gotcha. Because that used to just be a trail. You guys improved the gravel about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, we added some gravel on it. It needs more. There's just no base to it at all. So you can add more material on it and it just washes out in a couple of days.
Chris, if it's possible to do that chip seal like you did down to Palisades, or it's not pavement, but man, it compacts down, or like Jim, like you did on the Varney Cutoff Road in front of my lodge. I mean, you might as well be driving on pavement. It's really effective.
Yeah.
We did pave the Ruby Creek Road at the tune of about $3 million for 3 miles.
Yeah, so you can do, like John was saying, you can do some mag as long as the gravel that's down there has a little bit of clay in it to stabilize it or keep it together. But that's, yeah, you are right, John. It works amazingly well. And it's like $3,000 instead of $1 million.
Parking's good.
Brian seems to be, I mean, it can get tight.
You can always.
If there's room for more parking, every single, you know, what, 20 years from now, there's not going to be enough parking. 10 years from now.
I remember
So-
old story. It's there now.
Yeah, well, but it won't be in 10 years. So again, any of these, if we can press out the boundaries for the parking areas, with the exception of the lots that have already been done, like, you know, Palisades is amazing. Don't need more parking. But Story could use more parking.
So I've got,
Caution about just increasing parking capacity is then you're reducing or impacting river recreation. If you look at the Bitterroot, they have a lot more congestion on the river than they do at boat ramps, opposed to like the Madison or the Blackfoot, for example. So you may be creating one problem for another if we do build out parking lot's as big as you could possibly get them.
That is one, I did hear that concern expressed by some folks that if you build it, they will come. And, there were some concerns that if we add more capacity, we're also, giving an avenue to add a lot more boats on the river. So.
I think Dave makes a good point though, and it's the matter of in and out, in and out. I don't know that capacity is the name of the game. It's the speed with which you can get in, get out.
Yeah, it reduces stress. There's also frustration that happens on the river, which for a lot of people, that's the peak of frustration. So that can also be tackled through other, like in a perfect world, we can address the number of humans on the river and then also make it really seamless to get them on.
Yeah,
That's the
I
main
mean,
thing.
That's the ideal.
That's the idea.
We're coming at this thing that this was, when we looked at the satisfaction surveys, this accounted for 70% of the dissatisfaction on the river.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And so we are on top of the most important thing that we can be doing on the Madison River right now is improving the infrastructure to accomplish what Dave's done. And that's in and out and flow and that sort of thing. We are absolutely on it right now.
Just to echo that, talking to some of outfitters that we work with, listening to guests, it's that first half mile. It's the getting in and getting out. And after a half mile down the river, everybody's spread out.
Yeah, and you'll get little clusters of packet and like, God, we gotta pull over and let this
Let 'em
go
go,
down.
let that
And
wave go
That's
by.
what fishing guides do. Do that to improve the experience and, or, yeah.
But the congestion points are put ins and take outs.
This was the bulk of it. So hopefully we're getting it right.
Yeah. So is Chris, valuable feedback? We've got potentially add a second ramp. Improve the road.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Story Ditch is our site throughout the whole river corridor.
Get a comment here, improve and organize parking. Is that a consensus point of view?
It's a similar situation back to where, it just sort of starts.
It turns into a free for all.
Yeah. Chris said there's no room to expand it, and we would certainly have to believe Chris, it's his site. If that could just be pushed back a little bit toward the highway, if the parking lot could get bigger toward the highway, it would solve everything.
Dave, did you have any feedback on Story?
No, I agree with this.
The next one is Varney. I gather that's the highest priority site on the river.
You've got camping, you've got lots of boat launches.
There's a lot of problems.
Kind of got it all in there.
Already, it's second to Lyons. It's the highest use site. It's got a little, it's almost equal distribution between launch and takeout. But you have an awkward geometry to a single ramp. In terms of like cutting your trailers, especially if you have someone that's a casual user that fishes 4 or 5 times a year. It's also what you find on the Upper Madison is the closer you get to the Gallatin Valley, you get a much higher percentage of, folks that are weekend warriors.
Right.
And they're not quite as proficient. It's not their day job. And, backing trailers up. And so you have a real odd kind of angle to cut. And then when you get to the bottom of the river, it's really a problem. It's kind of at the end of like a little channel and it's really shallow. And so you got to drag your boat. So it's a lot of problems all the others. You only have one ramp and then you kind of need to excavate that somehow to get boats in now more efficiently.
2 ramps, an
You
additional ramp is
really
very
need,
helpful.
that's like the #1 priority in the entire upper river. is You need 2 ramps in Barney.
And another latrine, because you've got all the campers.
You need a better staging
I'd
area.
like to ask about the camping thing. It strikes me that we may have outgrown the idea that these sites are also camp destinations. I pulled in there and I damn near ran over a kid while they were picnicking alongside the river because his little ball ran up in front of everything. And it's like, why is this happening in one of the most busy sites on the river?
That is similar experience with it.
You know, so it was a thing that made sense 20 years ago. I'm not sure overlaying camping and picnicking and all that stuff on top of the site. I'm a little bit in alignment with what Dave said. Those need to be efficient to get in and get back out. I question it, so I'm asking it as a
There's a few
question.
campsites that are upstream, that
Yes,
are really
yeah.
private and don't really interfere with the day use, egress, egress,
Mhm.
egress. But, yeah, it's a very valid
Upstream
question.
in Barney, yes,
The upstream
yeah.
stuff with Barney, yeah, those are.
Yes,
really
those
cool,
ones that
private.
are driving in
Yeah.
that are right along the
Right.
road. that are-
Yeah,
The
those are the
trucks
ones
are always
that
parked in a
we might
funny
want to
place.
cannibalize.
What's involved in that, Jay?
Couple things, well, expanding camping or moving camping, was that?
Either moving or like for sure, like I know in the Ennis lot, there's, I think it's a safety issue.
Well, a solution would be to move the camping out of the traffic zone, more or less, and where it's farther upstream. There's a lot more pioneer camping going on up there too. There's 2 tracks going down closer to the river, and people are camping into the willows and stuff like that. I'm not talking about the far upstream end.
Human waste is a problem as well when you start getting that.
And that's definitely a candidate for another latrine. Sometimes expansion of camping doesn't always appeal to the neighbors.
You know, I would like not to be that guy, and I like the concept of people camping and not taking away opportunity, but I mean, I think we're empowered here, or our hope is to come up with solutions that work for everybody. And that includes not taking camping opportunities away, but coming up with good, creative, safe.
Sometimes that is a problem for us when we try to expand camping. Also, there's development regulations for the density of camping and that sort of thing. We have to work out with the county. It's probably not in a floodplain, but all those things we have to consider when we're developing anything.
And let's say this recommendation was to remove the first 2 campsites downstream of the current boat ramp and repurpose this a boat rigging area. Is that something you can do, or is that a?
Well,
It depends on the action. We may have to do it today.
yeah.
So it very, well, yeah, it's because it's a change in, if it's designated as a management action, we may have to do an EA, which involves public notice. So, yeah, it's certainly something we can do, but depending on what it is, there could be additional process. It may not be just as simple as, taking down the
Taking
camping
trees,
signs, yeah.
Generally,
Just to clarify, excuse me for interrupting, I think what we're talking about is no overnight camping. You can still picnic there, is that what?
I think the whole picnic thing
It's the
is a problem
safety
too.
issue.
But you're gonna have people, right? I mean, what's your opinion?
Well, I think. Not sure I'm understanding exactly. So the thought would be is just to make that a picnic area.
I don't know. I'm just trying to get clarity.
I think the thought is to have it not be picnic or camping, but have it be ingress, egress, rigging,
Okay.
watching.
Mooring.
Be similar to what they did at Craig, where you had, you move 4 campsites, put parking spots there. It's the same.
A lot of it just depends on the size and the scope of what we're trying to do. Like generally, if I'm gonna have move 20 yards of virgin ore, you gotta. So that's, that's part of the deal. That's the process. we go through. That's one thing that if I was trying to do this at Cameron Bridge here in Belgrade just a year ago, it's already a 2-track that's, knee deep from 4-wheel drive, and I just wanted to fill that in, and that was more than 20 yards of content, 20 yards of material, I should say. So there's some things I bumped into that you wouldn't necessarily expect, but to change that would make that a road and fill that area in. It's kind of the buffer zone between the little camping turnout and that would probably be more than 20 yards of material. But anything's possible.
Yeah.
is it physically accessible to put an additional ramp in further downstream from the existing one? 'Cause it's a fairly steep bank.
It's very high bank.
It's a steep bank where the current ramp is, the two right.
Well, but that's why it's at an
Diagonal.
angle.
Yeah,
So you're using up quite a bit of space. You've got those big trees in a lot of those areas there.
Yeah, we put them at an angle purposely because that it lasts longer that way when it's going in the current. It's perpendicular to the river. It causes.
So I could also see that because of the steepness and the depth that you have to access road. It's fairly narrow.
And just any boat ramp work would be reviewed by our hydrogeomorphologist. And to make, we're looking for stability from the boat ramp.
Banks.
And then, of course, there's also the additional permitting.
Is it possible to look at a ramp upstream from?
More so than downstream. More so than downstream.
You don't
There's
have
an,
a
there's
bank.
an island there, as you will call,
Yeah, there's that little
upstream, and
side-
so it's a little tiny side channel that comes in. I'm not sure. Couldn't go way upstream, you know?
right.
It's upstream, you got that side channel.
That comes-
Yeah, you kind of pop out and then you got to boogie over just to get to the current ramp. So that's a logistic.
What if one was a
You know,
takeout ramp and one was a put-in ramp?
You need two at the same time. That's the problem, is you only have one ramp and you're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting, you know. So you need to be able to get boats, you need to be able to watch 2 boats at a time, and then take out 2 boats at a time. In those 2-hour windows in the morning, 2-hour windows in the afternoon.
That was the famous photograph, right, that was floating around, 12 boats waiting to get out.
More than 12.
Yeah.
All right, so
Okay.
Barney, we're hoping for another ramp. We're hoping to maybe remove some tight campsites as you're coming in on the
Or
river.
move them,
Remove them.
move.
Suggest
Move rather than-
That's a better word. Thank you. Move them upstream. And when we do that, improving those camping sites upstream with possibly some fire pits, some picnic tables, another latrine.
Yeah, the designated campsites have fire pits. It's the pioneer ones that
Yep.
don't. It's hard to stay ahead of those. We've done a lot to do, especially in high wind areas like the also in Madison. We don't like rock fire rings, so we're trying to get metal fire rings installed.
Yes, one issue people have with that is those campsites as you're coming in, you're camped on the river, you're looking over the Madison River. It's really pretty.
Yeah.
The ones upstream, there's a huge bank of willows. You cannot walk through them to get down to that small little side channel. So I don't know, something to throw out.
Jay, is that your purview as well, with campsites, or is that parks?
No, it's under the fishing access, the fishing access, the camping at fishing access sites. Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe if we made the sites much nicer, that would help offset the fact that we're not having as good a view. The
Right.
views are now of the Madison mountain range, that wide open range that's behind there.
Yeah, let's hammer down on that one, have a deep line.
It smells really pretty good, other than the turnaround there and the boat ramp is really congested, so. Tight, right? What would you do to change that?
Remove it there.
Yeah, it's kind of an awkward parking area. It's like this big roundabout circle thing. And so I don't know if there's a way to make that more efficient, because parking is, the capacity of parking there is problematic. I know you're physically limited, but I don't know if there's a way to look at the flow to maximize with the space that you have, because that is a factor. And then the other factor is, that the launch area is sort of, that road is pretty bad.
Could you add another ramp upstream of the one that's there presently?
The terrain there. We have problems with that road because the ditch leaks.
Yeah.
It's often wet.
Yeah,
That's why there's
that's why this gets all right.
cattails right there.
It doesn't have, I mean, it's a much smaller volume. I mean, it's like a third, less than a third. It's 4%, 4.4% versus Varney, which is 14.3.
It's critical during salmon fly, which is the last
Yeah.
week in June, and then the rest of the year it can really handle the traffic. But it would be great to fix that boat ramp area.
Yeah, the one that really is bad.
Certainly is the only one.
So what about
Just the surface of it,
And
or
slope.
is the donut too small? It's too tight of a turning radius, I guess.
Donut works.
You mean at the bottom?
Yeah,
You know, we go off to the right.
Yeah.
and come back around.
It works.
yeah, it's a one car only event.
Yeah, you gotta get right. You got, it's one that has to go down, you gotta wait for them to come out.
Well, I've seen people stop at rig, you know, on the right hand side, one or two boats.
Yeah, you kind of get one. It's
What happens if you remove that donut and reconfigure that?
That one's, it's not that big. I'm not sure we would gain a whole lot
Uh-huh.
if we actually pull that out of there. 'Cause then this guy's rigging too slow, then somebody's gonna pull.
It's a
straight past
long, I
it.
mean, it's a long road down there, so you need to be able to drive it head first and then. Are you talking about the turnaround down
Yeah,
there?
so you turn around and then.
You need that, you need to kind of, you need to, it's not like for the rigging area, you kind of have to rig up top, there's really no other option. And then you have to be able to, it's a long enough trail down that you have to go head first. You don't really want to back down that whole way, so then you need that little turn around the bottom to launch your boat. And drive back out, and then the next person can kind of go down. You're kind of physically limited to what your
Who
options
owns that ramp?
Ramp we do.
FWP.
FWP. I'm a little unclear exactly on where our upstream boundary is there. Off the top of my head, but
What would happen if that circular area, and I'm just trying to envision what that is, that's just bushes and willows and in that, down below where you, that
yeah,
donut,
in the circle, in the cul-de-sac.
well, that's just vegetation.
Can that?
What
be-
happened if you bulldoze that out of there?
You don't want people parking.
No, you never
I
want
think it would
people
cause
Yeah.
congestion if it wasn't.
And
defined
more
that that was the go route.
non-commercial is that kind of back to what you're saying that aren't as good. Usually.
Yeah, that's heavily, again, the closer you get to Bozeman, the more, there's a. It's dominated by non-commercial
Could,
use.
could that be modified to a double wide ramp?
It's a gravel ramp, it's not a concrete ramp.
Right.
You have to widen that.
It is.
The whole road would have to be
Yeah, the
wide.
problem is the
You're at
access.
the
road.
island there, and there's a real steep island right off the ramp.
Yeah, you're in like, you kind of pop out in a little channel. It's also sometimes problematic with lower flows.
But upstream is a very shallow bank and low,
Yeah,
not dangerous at all.
So you'd have to somehow, it depends on how much land you have, because, the problem is you got that road, you get that long road after you've rigged, and I don't know how you solve that. So you'd have to, when you get down there, you'd have to have enough land to basically be able to have like a second donut or that would be,
That's
what's that factor?
Well, there's that wetland from the ditch.
So it's not
Where the
doable.
cattails are and all that. We have to-
There's a lot of wetlands.
Yeah, right, to the,
So-
yeah.
Do you think it's clear to recreational users where they should rig?
Well, you have to kind of rig, yeah, you have to rig up top,
So they
you
don't,
can't really,
like the weekend word as we told it.
They'd be
well,
told-
once in a while
told
they
very
do.
quickly that, hey, no,
Yeah.
you're not supposed to go.
So
Signage.
signage,
Signage.
yeah,
Boat ramp rigging area
That'd be good.
would be,
Raft pumping area.
yeah,
okay, signage. For boat ramp rigging area, empty trailer parking, eliminate some chaos. Expand boat ramp to double wide, but that's not
I think
workable.
that's really feasible.
Okay. Scratch that.
How about making a concrete ramp? Is that a good idea?
All it takes is money and a
Well, it takes
permit.
us money.
Welcome to
Probably
life.
be your highest priority.
We don't have that many
It's not
gravel ramps.
not heavily used.
Which usually wasn't, there was permanent.
I mean, current volume, the ramp itself, one ramp is probably adequate. It's a little more of a parking area.
Yeah,
and a
Onyx
crappy
shows,
road.
Onyx shows you guys are on like half a mile.
But it's wet, it's a wetland.
A lot of it.
Okay, Ennis.
There's Burnt Tree too.
Well, yeah.
Oh, I thought we did Birch Tree. Oh, sorry about that.
Seems like-
Okay.
It's similar.
It's 9:30.
Yeah, I know.
We're getting close. This is,
Yeah.
this is productive here.
Uh, Feedback on Burnt Tree.
There's lots of space and it's just like the parking's all fractured and split up. It's a lovely boat ramp because you can go use it, put in, and it gets very well used. You know.
One ramp is fine for Burnt Tree, but
I think one ramp's fine.
if you're gonna do anything, trying to optimize the parking.
That ramp's already kind of tricky at the way it comes down to the diagonal and
It's
a
a-
pole ramp.
it's a ramp.
And it's a little bit of a high bank. So yeah, that'd be tricky to add another one. I mean, if somebody went in there and looked at some efficiency with maybe how to change the parking a little bit. Because it's interesting, there's a little parking spot up top. There's a parking spot just to the right when you go down. And then there's this strange circular parking area. There's 3 different places. to park. But in general, it's kind of a sleeper little spot.
So-
Let's move on to Ennis.
Right.
And Ennis, Jay, I just, reflecting on our commission meeting in June, we had that issue with the annual ice flows and, I had several requests from community members to see if they could come with their backhoe and help. But I think given the critical nature of these access sites, can we be assured that, Valley Garden and Ennis will be maintained, they're on a maintenance schedule to be addressed? in the
We
spring?
work on that. I mean, it also ices at least every other year.
Yeah,
And we get to it as soon as we can. I mean, that's. With last year, it was a little bit confusing because we asked for the emergency closure, the safety closure on February. Those only last for 90 days, I believe. And because it was colder longer, we were thinking we might actually need an extension because you can't get in there.
right.
It's not just, I mean, somebody could go in there with a backhoe and clear the road, but the latrines that stuff gets floated up and it's not exactly a clean site after that happens. The one in Valley was pushed off of the vault a little bit 2 or 3 years ago. So we never really know what we're gonna get until we can really get in there and look at what we have to deal with. The road damage really wasn't that bad. We did that ourselves. We fixed the road last year ourselves, the year before that type of force.
We need to be really clear that there's a lot of legal issues with independent people going in with backhoes and clearing out our sites with
Okay.
safety constraints and having to have insurance and everything. So it's important to let us take care of it, knowing that we're doing it as fast as we can.
Is there a long-term solution to the latrines, building them up on concrete, major foundations, et cetera?
It was the ice last year was halfway up the latrine. Wow. So that's at least almost 5 feet. So they'd have to be way up there. I don't know.
We've had the same issue on others. I know, Region 7 down on the Yellowstone. Had this, yeah, literally they just get moved by the ice. When those huge ice jams come through, like Jay says, are several feet thick. And not much we can do to stop them through. Our primary concern with closing those sites is safety. Typically what you can get is, there could be big holes, it could be 5-6 feet thick and you could be walking across the top of it, which would go right down. And that's when it's unsafe like that, that's when we have to close them.
Just as a ground, they could be hollows because the river's still under there somewhere. And then that there's a cave essentially in there. After the water subsides.
Is the biggest thing just waiting for the ice melts out?
Very much.
And then after the ice melts out, how much time does it take?
Just depends on the extent of the damages. The last couple of years, we've been pretty lucky. Yeah, and we've been able to do it ourselves.
How much of the issue is the latrine, like, is replacing the pit toilets with like, you bring in porta potties?
Well, we did. We had porta potties in there last year when we were first able to get it open because we opened. Vaults, the stuff in the vault also freezes. So if it freezes and it's full, we can't let anybody use it anyway. That's why we brought in the portables. So we have to wait until those thaw. And we pump them in the fall, knowing that it's probably gonna fill up with water to freeze, but even if it's just frozen water, you can't let people use them. So that's why we put the workers in there.
So you can open a site even if you're waiting on the vault, right?
Correct. Right. I mean, we did last year.
Right.
Just given the importance of the Ennis site for the local community and for users, I would encourage, if we can just encourage FWP to be ready to go every season, because you're going to have those ice flows almost every year, at least in my 18 years in the on the channel section. Usually we get a cold spell. Now, maybe climate change, we won't get as many, but this year and just be ready to go early in the season, because it really does affect the business community of Ennis dramatically if that's not.
Well, we got it open within a couple of days of the ice getting out there. Actually, John Wayne called me and said, "Oh, I can't believe you got it open already." And that was just a few days after we were asking for the emergency extension.
Yeah, that was, it was,
Created quite a
I was
panic.
very impressed with how quickly.
I mean, we get
After
it's the weather. I mean, we just have to wait for the ice to get out there and see what we've got to do.
If you can make it a priority as much as possible, I think from our
It's
community.
It already is.
it means a lot.
So the other question that just popped in the head and float out there. So how much time for the preparation after the ice do you need to address the bathrooms? Is that one of them?
It just depends when the vault itself thaws, the
Yeah.
material thaws.
So popped in my head is, can you deploy a suite of porta potties and
We
then
did.
just take them out?
We did,
But I mean,
we
take
did,
them
we
out.
have.
That's what
Yeah, that's
Ennis
what-
functions are.
That's,
No
that-
more. No more.
Or you said just
vault
remove the
latrines.
oh, just
Using
remove
porta
it.
potties, and then come November 1, you take them. And does that save you any time in the spring when you're addressing ice issues?
Not really. I mean, it's when it's melted, we have them pumped right away. If we can't pump them, can't have them pumped, we just have porta potties there until we can.
Yeah, and sometimes in January, you can actually use the site, so. Yeah, every year is different, and you wouldn't have the trains in there, and that would be a problem.
And with as much use as it has there, the porta potties aren't. The good thing is we don't have to service the porta potties. The service does that for us, you know.
I think what Dan and Jay said right here, if the public knows that it's FWP's stated priority, that like, we understand this is an issue, we're gonna get ice every year, we're going to get the ramps open as soon as we can, they're gonna be closed every year for a brief period of time, then everybody's gonna exhale. We're not gonna have the big panic like we had this last year. Like, they're gonna close Valley Garden and Ennis at the same time, and we're trying to address crowding, and all,
There's little
people just freaked out.
misinformation flying around. at that
People
time.
freaked out, but
Yeah.
if you state that, I think everybody's gonna understand.
It isn't a closure stating that when we say it's an emergency closure due to ice.
Or whatever it was.
I
it
think,
created a
I
huge
think
panic.
the optics or there was a date associated
Mhm.
and the perception was, right,
90
that,
days.
holy cow, you know, so it recognizing the anxiety that causes if someone sees a date and assumes that is gonna definitely be closed until that date. If the communication could be adjusted, basically saying emergency closure until.
I honestly don't know where that December.
No, that's what all of, so we do emergency closures all the time for either, safety reasons or whatever, but there is very strict guidelines. And they're only closed as necessary. So typically the room notice has language. There is always an end date, but there's also always language that says or opened when safe. So that language is always in there. It's so, like we just did one on the Clark for the rail bridge. So it was like a 3-month closure. But if you actually read the language, we can close it as needed for safety reasons within that 3-month period.
Right.
But the plan is only to close it as needed, so it might only be 3 or 4 mornings that it's closed. So that's how all of our emergency rule notices are written. I think what happened with the ice situation is a lot of misinformation got out and there was general panic, so we can probably do better with getting public information out. And we'll make sure we do that, but.
Like a Q&A.
But
Or that it's anticipated that it's gonna take a week of work, or
Yeah.
something that can give.
That's the language that was missing. December.
Yeah, our intent is always to get them open as, whenever they're safe and as quick as
And I
possible.
understand that, but
And
if
we'll
you could,
communicate that
but
better.
if you can communicate that we anticipate the work will require 5 days of good weather, or whatever.
Well, and part of the problem with Innis, if I remember correctly, was we literally couldn't get in to evaluate it for a certain period of time.
It's kind of when it started, it went quick, it melted out quick once it started melting.
Right.
And we were able to get on it. With one of the things we ran into with possibly needing an extension before it actually started to melt was, if it's an extensive amount of damage, you gotta hire a contractor. And they're not exactly on, they don't exactly have a red phone for us. Titan's been great to work with down there in the Madison Valley. But you know, we're in line with everybody else.
Let's keep going here. So we had some, I think, some good feedback on possibly relocating the left ramp or adding a double ramp upstream of the ramp
At Ennis.
at Ennis.
There's that one channel that comes in, often is dry, late season. There's a couple of campsites, those campsites that are just upstream from the boat ramp, 2 or 3.
Yeah,
that-
upstream would be challenging, because it's shallow too.
Well, downstream is private. That's why we had to move the road a couple
Oh,
of weeks
that's right.
ago. Like right
Just
there.
add this, yeah.
Yeah. We tried to acquire that and we're unsuccessful.
You expand the current one and just a double watch.
For the double length ramp.
A lot of those ramps are windy, right? It's this, let's be 11, but it's a double wide. You can put two trailers side by side.
Yeah, or at least improve it somehow where you can fit 2 boats in there now.
Yeah, it's
Nobody
kind of
knows
nice,
that.
right?
It's like a beach. So. if it was-
Yeah, if you have a
better
structure,
defined,
that's like more obvious, right? It's like, we definitely get two.
Probably the more cost effective.
I don't think
The
the
parking's really
campsites in that launch site.
Right up, just upstream from the current ramp. There's 3. I think. We do have, there is some room there, put a ramp in there, would have to be cut.
buffer.
Sorry,
There's like a buffer there. It's
yeah, there's that,
ways.
yeah.
It's not like barn.
No, there's a little bit more of a buffer, but if we were to widen the ramp, it would make more sense to widen it upstream if we were to put in another ramp. That would be upstream, because there'd be a ton of places to moor downstream. Before you got onto the private, and you could still be below the high water mark to moor.
That one should be angled down river as well. That one's kind of perpendicular. It's challenging for recreators to back in.
The turnaround there is, yeah, you can't quite get straight in front of the ramp that way.
You ever have conflicts with the campers? And that was in there. 4th of July, there were
Parking
kids
is
swimming
wrong.
under anchor lines.
Yeah, they swim in there because the ramp is like a really nice beach.
Yeah. Yeah, there were kids on the ramp and
Yeah.
Oh, the lower mass, that's where you
Oh.
got kids in there. Yeah.
any other feedback on it?
So the takeaway is hopefully an extra boat ramp.
Structure.
Communication from FWD about here's what we're seeing.
It's a priority, though, but it's a priority for us. Know how important that is,
And just
especially for early season.
as Elaine said,
Sign
yeah,
up,
communicating that to the public in an effective way.
I think Dennis, with the popularities to Palisades. Because
Sure would be
Dennis is
nice.
kind
I
of.
just don't think there's the room at the public, or excuse me, the private land surrounding it.
We actually have a fair bit of land there, 100 and something acres.
Oh, wow.
Mostly to the east, but upstream, well, it goes all the way down to, used to be the Love Ranch, I think, to the south. We have quite a bit there.
Camping down there.
Most of the
Little
camping
lodge
is down
park.
there. Most of the camping is, on that other eastern road. And then there's the trail. There's only 3 sites, I believe, that are right on the river, just upstream of the program.
Do you think there'd be a possibility to expand parking?
We'd have to remove a lot of material, probably those first 3 camps, because where that existing, near the first latrine where the parking is on the left there, there's like 6 or 8 sites, slots there, and then it's big. So we require a lot of vegetation. I think the new road is a lot wider than the old road, so I've noticed a lot more parking on the road, on the way in as soon as you drop
On the
down.
right, yeah,
On the right,
parallel.
yeah.
That works well.
And people park on the left too, probably
Yeah.
makes it too tight, but it seems like that's relieved a little bit congestion.
It definitely did.
Boat ramp area. People are parking up on the, that hump, right, where the old retreat used to be. That
A
hump.
lot of that is shuttle drivers.
Shuttle drivers tend to park out by the highway. Oh, where they
I'm
park.
always-
I see what you're saying, where they park.
Okay.
I
Let's
see.
move on to Valley
Getting late.
Garden.
Yeah,
Valley
let's keep
Garden.
going. Last one.
Valley Garden. Dan, you want to lead us off?
I'm sure there's a lot, I mean, you've got lots of parking there.
Doesn't get used
It's
a lot.
relatively low use for that.
Yeah.
It's the same ice issue.
Right, actually, you did that parking lot, the downstream parking lot, just a couple years ago, like did a whole bunch of airports. And with that ramp a little bit in that direction. That's a great walking site too.
Yeah.
That's where the issues get a lot, but
That one's good.
You're good?
We still,
I want to.
we just on this mentioned about increasing it when the water flows high, is that something still?
that's what we're talking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I was just saying it's on there, I don't know if that's gonna be the recommendation. but-
Yeah, it's another
Let's take that up from the
Concept.
22nd.
Okay.
Yeah. That goes with that dialogue. Thank you all very much.
We're only doing the upper.
What's that?
We're only doing the upper.
We're only doing the upper. Is that helpful? Yeah.
It's only 2 more.
We're all good down there. I want to thank you all for your time this evening. I'm sorry we ran over. It won't happen again.
Just one comment. Next topic is rest notation and walkway section. Ryan did a real good simulation of the effects of rest notation that should get put on the team site. I document the swim or trespass, just a big bend for $3. That should be on the website. Yeah. Some basic facts about. And also.
You can have it all.
did a real good survey of
So it's nice.
responses to the meeting that generated the rules.
Hey, Richard, I'm having trouble hearing anything you're saying.
Commissioner Walsh, we do have to take public comment.
Yes, okay. So,
Just saying that there's a lot of valuable information, data that should be put on the website. If the next meeting is going to be rest notation.
you bet. And Scott, if you'll forward your info, to me, I'll make sure it gets posted.
I will, Mac actually currently has that.
Okay.
So I will get with him and make sure that.
Great.
We'll post it up, and you get that as well, and you like it and see it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open this up for public comment. Sir, 2 minutes, Louis?
Yeah, my name is Hugh Zach. I'm from Helena and appreciate the obvious dedication and e-base and all of the folks on the work group. My issue is Upper Walkway. And in that context, without taking time to go through the details, I think it's fair to say that the new rule allowing fishing from boats for the first time in 30 to 50 years does represent a major change. And it's a change that I believe is going to engender, has potential to engender a lot of conflict and potentially compromise the quality of recreation for literally thousands of people each year who walk away that section. So I'm really encouraged in that context that you're going to take up the upper walkway section as a priority to address even in 2 weeks, which is amazing, in conjunction with restoration issue too. And I would like to take this opportunity to request some time on the agenda then to talk about the review kind of concerns with the rule as it was passed in November, and also to present what the anglers who are fishing that section now are telling me and other volunteers about what they think about the walkway section of the walkway section. So
Do you have that in a summary form or something?
I will in 2 weeks if I'm on the agenda for sure. Yeah, so again, appreciate it. And we're just running late, but definitely would be happy to share that information with you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very kindly. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have just pretty simple questions. Will the documents that are on the team page for you guys, will those be available for the public or can they access them? And then, access to the full data report from the Northwestern Car Count Survey, we'd love to see that, the Pinnacle Survey. And then, so the team site, the documents that are there, can we access those? Will you have those readily available at each meeting?
So the team site is just set up for the work group members. The other things like the recording for this meeting, the other materials, we will make those publicly available, similar to how we did it for the negotiated rulemaking committee. So we had a website set up. Now since then, our website's completely changed. So I'm not exactly sure of how we'll do it or where it is, but we will get that set up and the public will have access to anything that's public. But the team site itself is specifically for the
Sure.
work group.
I just, having the materials tonight was very beneficial for a lot of it. And then obviously there was pieces that we discussed that we didn't have access to see. So it'd be nice as the public, whether attending or online or in person, or even following up from the meetings, to have access to those same documents, graphs, et cetera, so that we can.
Let me follow up with staff and more. I think it's on request anyway.
That's on the Northwestern information.
Some of it's the Northwestern, yeah, some of it's the Northwestern, some of it's the graphs and the documentation that we're talking about putting on there to refer back through next conversation. To follow up this meeting. Oh, yeah, but then lastly, just thank you to everybody who's here and participating and who's volunteering their time on behalf of Madison River. I'm encouraged as a conservation group to hear the word conservation go through everybody's mouths here as a priority. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, thank you all for being here. Spending your evening with us. Good. All right, good night.
Montana City.
Thank you very much.